My father called me a disgrace at the 4th of July cookout. I set an envelope by his plate and walked away. The paper plates were still damp with watermelon juice when my father raised his glass and called me a disappointment in front of 30 people. My name is Odessa Voss and I was 35 years old, standing at the edge of my own family's 4th of July table. He lifted his beer like a toast. He said he was grateful for all his children. Then he looked right past me and said, well, most of them. Nobody argued. Nobody even looked up, so I didn't argue either. I smiled, set a plain manila envelope down beside his plate, wished him a happy 4th and walked to my car. I had reached the end of the gravel drive, engine idling while a tractor crossed ahead of me when the screen door banged open behind me and my father started to shout. The neighbors came out onto their porches to see what was happening. But to understand what was inside that envelope, you have to go back 4 years to the week my mother died. Welcome back. If stories about quiet people finally getting the last word are your kind of thing, settle in. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss the moment it all turns, because this one turns hard. That morning before any of it, I was at my desk in Milford Junction reviewing a title file for a young couple closing on their first house, a small stucco place near the elementary school. It was technically a holiday. I keep odd hours when a closing is stuck. There was a lien from 11 years back that nobody had properly released, a clerical ghost that could have killed the whole city. I found the satisfaction of judgment buried in the county archive, cleared it, and emailed the closing attorney before night. I'm a title insurance underwriter. I spend my days finding the one buried document that changes who legally owns what. I built my reputation on it, county by county, over 11 years, starting as a research clerk pulling microfilm nobody else wanted to touch. Nobody handed me a career. I tell you that not to brag, but so you understand exactly the kind of person my family had decided I was. Cold, calculating, the daughter who chose paperwork over people. I closed the laptop and looked at the calendar. The 4th of July. I had circled it weeks earlier and then pretended I hadn't. 45 minutes out to the orchard, 45 minutes back, a whole afternoon of being talked about instead of talked to. I told myself every year I wouldn't go. And every year I went, because the woman who raised me would have wanted me there and because I had unfinished business at that property that none of them knew about. I picked up my keys and told myself this year would be different. I was right, just not the way I meant. The drive out to Callaway Ridge hasn't changed in my lifetime. State road, then county blacktop, then the split rail fence my grandfather built the summer he came home from the Pacific. The Voss orchard has been in the family 3 generations, 60 acres of apple trees on a hillside above the river, a packing barn that still smells like cold storage and sawdust, and the farmhouse where my father was born in the upstairs bedroom. There's a crabapple tree in the front yard my mother planted the spring she married in. She used to say a family is like a root system, you never see most of what's actually holding it up. I came around the last bend and there it was, strung with little flags, cars parked in the mowed grass, smoke rolling off 2 grills. To anyone driving past, it looked like the happiest house on the ridge. I parked at the far end of the lane, past everyone else, the way you park when part of you is always ready to leave early. Muscle memory, I suppose. The body remembers where it isn't fully wanted long after the mind stops making excuses for it. I sat there a moment with the engine ticking. I could hear my brother's laugh carrying across the yard, big and easy, the laugh of a man who believes the ground under his feet already belongs to him. I checked my bag. The recipe tin was still inside where I'd put it that morning without quite letting myself ask why. I'd carried that tin around for 2 years. Today, for the first time, I'd brought it back to the place it came from. I didn't yet know that by sundown, everyone at that table would understand exactly what it meant. Cole met the guests at the gate like he already owned the deed. He's 39, 4 years older than me, and he's always had a way of standing in a doorway so you have to ask him who knows. He shook hands, clapped backs, pointed people toward the coolers like a man giving a tour of his own estate. His wife Brian worked the other end, refilling lemonade and saying things just loud enough. So glad the people who actually show up made it today, she said, smiling straight at me when she said it. That's the trick of it, the smile. My Aunt Opal sat in the shaw. Like a judge, 72 and certain of everything. And when she saw me, her mouth went flat the way it does when she spots a stain on a good tablecloth. My father stood near the head of the table, tall and weathered in the way old orchard men stay handsome, and he gave me a nod so small it could have been a twitch. Hello to you too, Dad. I carried a bowl of deviled eggs to the table because that's what you do with your hands when nobody offers you a chair. And I watched because that's my actual profession, watching for where the numbers don't line up. Something at that party didn't. Cole leaned down and said something low into our father's ear, and my father listened, then nodded slow and serious, the way you nod at something you've already half decided. Brian caught it too. She glanced at me, then quickly away. Whatever Cole was selling that afternoon, my father was already buying. I just didn't know yet what it was. You don't become the family's disappointment overnight. It takes one bad season and a room full of frightened people. 4 years ago, my mother was dying in the front bedroom and the orchard was drowning. I knew that part because I'm the only one in the family who reads a Leon report without moving my lips. The mortgage was 3 payments behind, the spray equipment loan was worse, and my brother had a plan. Cole stood at the foot of my mother's bed and laid out an investment, a sure thing, a man he knew putting together a cider distribution deal that would clear the debt by spring. All he needed was for our father to pull equity out of the orchard to buy in. I asked questions, that's all I did at first. I asked who the man was, where the paperwork was, what happened to the 60 acres if the sure thing wasn't. Cole called me heartless. He said our mother was lying right there and all I cared about was fine print. I brought a folder. I'd spent 2 nights building a simple projection, what the deal would cost if it failed, what it would cost the house. I held it out. My father took it, looked at it for exactly 1 second and set it face down on the dresser without reading a word. We don't need your spreadsheets, Odessa, we need faith. And there it was, the line that drew itself between me and the rest of them, clean as a fence post. I had brought arithmetic to a deathbed. To this family, that was the same as bringing nothing at all. Here is something nobody tells you about being cast as the clue. You still keep showing up. 2 years ago on an ordinary Tuesday, I drove out to check on my father because the winter had been hard and he wasn't answering his phone. He let me in gruff and went back to his chair. I made coffee in the kitchen where I learned to make coffee, and while the pot ran, I saw it, a stack of mail shoved under the Sunday paper, the way you hide something you can't bring yourself to throw away. The top envelope had a bank's name in the corner and a line of red print across the front. Second notice. I didn't touch it. I'd like to tell you I respected his privacy. The truth is I already knew what it was. You don't spend 11 years reading other people's title problems and miss it sitting on your own father's kitchen table. I brought him his coffee and said as carefully as I could, Dad, if the orchard's in trouble, I can look at it. No charge, just let me see. He didn't even turn his head. The place is fine, I handled it, Cole and I handled it. We landed exactly where it always landed, on the son who stayed and the daughter who counted. I left it alone because pushing would only get me sent home faster. But I sat in my car at the end of that lane for a long time. A man who has handled it does not hide the second notice under the newspaper. A man who has handled it does not need to lie to his own daughter about it. Something was badly wrong with the orchard, and my father would rather lose it than let me help. Back at the party, I stood at the edge of the patio holding a plate and waiting for a chair that wasn't coming. There's a particular kind of loneliness in a crowd of people who share your last name, close enough to touch them and somehow standing outside the glass. A cousin's kid asked me who I was, not rudely, just honestly, the way children ask things. I'm your Aunt Odessa, I said, and watched him decide that didn't mean much to him. I looked for my mother out of pure habit. She'd have been at the grills bossing my father, sneaking the first ear of corn off the fire. 4 years gone and the yard still held a shape where she used to stand. I want to be clear about something because it matters for everything that came after. I did not drive out there that day hoping they'd finally love me correctly. I was done hoping for that particular thing. I came because I'd made my mother a promise and because there was one piece of unfinished business left to settle, and the 4th of July was the day I'd chosen to do it. I touched my bag and felt the hard edge of the tin through the canvas. Some decisions don't feel like decisions. They feel like a season finally turning, the way you know in your bones the cold is breaking even before the last frost lifts. I had carried this family on my back in the dark for 2 years. I had let them call me whatever they needed to call me, and today, quietly, that was going to end. I just had to get through the toast first. The neighbors came over around 4. The Renfrews have worked the next hillside as long as the Vosses have worked ours, and their fence line runs close enough to the patio that you can hand a pie across it. Luke Renfrew shook my father's hand and said the orchard looked beautiful this year. My father lit up the way he only does with an audience. He put his arm around Cole and swept his free hand toward the house, the barn, the long rows of trees, all of it gold in the late sun. This land's been Voss land since my granddad cleared the first row, he said. And it's going to stay Voss land, 3rd generation, standing right here. He squeezed Cole's shoulder. We've got it all worked out. Cole ducked his head, humble as a churchgoer, and Brian beamed, and Aunt Opal dabbed her eyes like she was watching a wedding. I stood 10 feet away holding a plate of food I hadn't touched, and I felt the strangest thing, not anger, something colder and quieter than anger, because I knew exactly what that property was worth down to the dollar. I knew who actually held the note on it, and it wasn't the man making the toast. He was standing in his own front yard promising the neighbors a legacy he no longer fully owned, and he had no idea. Hank raised his beer. To the Vosses, he said. Everyone drank. I lifted my cup too, because what else do you do? But my eyes went to the kitchen window where the stack of mail used to hide under the newspaper, and I thought, you have no idea how close you came to losing all of it. The cider deal failed, of course, the way they always do when there's no paper behind them. The man Cole trusted took the down payment and was gone before the ground thawed. My mother died that April before the first bloom, and the family needed someone to blame who wasn't grief and wasn't a con man nobody could find. So they blamed me. At the funeral, my Aunt Opal told 3 different women that Odessa cared more about money than her own mother. Cole stood at the casket with his hand over his heart, the devoted son who tried to save the orchard while his sister sat home with her spreadsheets. He cried beautifully, he always could, and I let them have the whole story because correcting it at my mother's graveside would have made me exactly the cold thing they already said I was. Here is what none of them ever learned. My mother spent her final 5 weeks in a hospice bed at home with a nurse 3 days a week, and the good pain medication insurance fights you over. Somebody paid for that, not my father who had nothing left but pride and acreage, not Cole who was busy chasing money he'd already lost. I paid it quietly, every invoice through a billing address that wasn't mine so nobody would ask. I held my mother's hand the night she died, and she knew, even if no one else did, which of her children had counted and which one had simply shown up. Most of them, my father would say years later, lifting his glass. He had no idea he was toasting the daughter who'd buried his wife with dignity. Cole worked the party like a man running for office. I watched him steer Hank Renfrew and 2 of the cousins on a slow loop of the property, pointing at the barn, the new stretch of fencing, the young rows on the back slope coming in strong. He talked about all of it with the easy pride of ownership. When Dad finally hangs it up, he said loud enough to carry, "We've got plans, bring the whole operation into the modern age." Brian walked beside him with her hand looped through his arm, nodding at every word. There's a particular rhythm to a man laying groundwork. I've sat across enough closing tables to know at the second I hear it. You don't talk that confidently about when Dad hangs it up unless you've already started moving the pieces. I drifted close enough to refill my lemonade and caught the tail end of it. Cole was telling a cousin the transfer was almost done, just a few signatures left, getting everything squared away so there'd be no mess later. No mess later. People who plan to inherit an orchard honestly don't talk about avoiding a mess. They talk about the harvest, the weather, the price of bushel crates. The phrase that kept snagging in my mind was almost done, just a few signatures left. My brother was in a hurry about something, and a man in a hurry to get signatures is a man afraid of what happens if he waits. I set my cup down for the first time all afternoon. I stopped thinking about how it felt to be there and I started paying attention. I should explain how a person ends up qualified to quietly take apart her own family's ruin. When my mother first got sick, I was 4 years into underwriting, still building a client base, clearing title on modest homes and the occasional small farm parcel. But agricultural clients teach you things a city underwriter never sees. You learn how 60 acres can look like $1 million on paper and still collapse because the cash isn't there in April. You learn what a charge-off is when a bank gives up trying to collect and sells the debt for pennies to a servicer who just wants it off the books. You learn what a deed of trust actually secures and exactly how a lien moves from one hand to another in this country quietly on paper without anyone in the family ever needing to sign a thing. I learned all of it because my clients lived and died by those documents, and because somewhere in the back of my mind I already knew my own family was sitting on the same cliff. By the time I saw that second notice under my father's newspaper, I wasn't a frightened daughter anymore. I was a professional who understood exactly what that read could mean, and exactly how much runway was left before a bank turns a family orchard into a line item in a courthouse auction. That knowledge is a heavy thing to carry into a house where no one will let you help. I'd sit at my desk at night and run the numbers on a property I wasn't welcome in just to know how bad it was. It was bad. But the same training that let me see the cliff also showed me the ledge, the narrow, legal, nearly invisible ledge a person with patience and savings could stand on to catch a falling house. I just had to be willing to do it alone. The week after I saw that notice, I went to see Marian Petrakis. Marian's been doing real estate law in Milford Junction since before I was born, a sharp-eyed woman with reading glasses she never cleans and a memory like a filing cabinet. She'd known my grandfather. She'd drawn up the deed when my parents married. If anyone could tell me what was really happening to the orchard, it was Marian. I sat across her cluttered desk and asked her plainly. She took off the smudged glasses, rubbed her eyes for a long moment, then told me. The mortgage had gone past saving. The bank had already charged off the loan and bundled it for sale the way they do when they've decided a property is a loss. The orchard was weeks from being listed at auction, and my father had told no one, not Cole, not Opal, not a soul. He'd rather lose 3 generations of Voss land in silence than admit out loud that he couldn't hold it. I sat with that for a minute. The clock on Marian's wall ticked. Then I asked her the question that changed everything. Marian, if the bank's already given up on the note, can a third party buy it? Can someone just step in and purchase the debt? She went still, put the glasses back on, and looked at me over the top of them, really looked, the way a person looks when they're recalculating who exactly you are. Yes, she said, somebody can, it's legal, it's quiet, and if it's done right, the bank doesn't care who writes the check. She paused. Odessa, are you asking me what I think you're asking me? I didn't answer right away. I was already doing the math. I want you to understand what it cost, because none of this fell out of the sky as a gift. I had spent 11 years building a career worth something. I had a retirement account I'd fed since I was 23. I had a small rental duplex paid down to a sliver of what I'd originally owed on it. To buy that note, I borrowed against the duplex, drained most of the retirement account, and emptied the savings every orchard kid is raised to fear needing someday. I sat in Marion's office and signed my own security out from under myself to catch a falling house that the people inside it would never know had been caught at all. We did it clean. Marion set up a trust to hold the note and the recorded lien on the property with terms I dictated. On paper, the trust simply became the new lender, the name the bank's old loan now answered to, and I put the whole thing into forbearance. No payments demanded, no collection activity, the debt frozen in place. My father would go on living in that house exactly as he always had. No rent, no notice, no knock at the door. The bank got its check and walked away, and the auction that was weeks from destroying my family simply never happened. As far as the world was concerned, Gideon Voss had handled it. He even started believing that himself. And I let him because the alternative was walking into that house and saying I saved you and watching his face curdle because being saved by the disappointment would have cost him more than losing the land. So I told no one. I drove home to Milford Junction that night, a great deal poorer, carrying a secret heavier than the debt itself. I did it for a reason I hadn't said out loud yet. The reason was in a tin box. Back in the present, the part. Why noise rose and fell like weather. Someone started the ice cream churn. Kids screamed through the sprinkler. My father held court at the head of the table and Cole kept the cups full and the whole machine of the afternoon ran on without me, the way it always did. I slipped away from it, walked across the yard to my mother's crabapple tree, where the noise thinned and the shade ran deep, and sat down on the old iron bench my father swore he'd repaint every spring and never did. From there I could see the whole party at a distance, like something happening to someone else. I took the tin out of my bag and held it in my lap. It was an old recipe tin, dented, the lid painted with faded cherries. My mother kept index cards in it, and later when she got sick she kept other things in it too. After she died, my father couldn't bear to go through her dresser, so the job fell to me, the way the hard, quiet jobs always did. I found the tin at the back of her bottom drawer under a folded quilt. Inside was a letter with my name on the front in her handwriting, the cursive gone shaky at the edges. I'd read it once the night I found it, then put it away and carried it around for 2 years without reading it again, because some letters you can only survive so many times. But I'd brought it back to the orchard today on purpose. I needed to read it here in the shade of her tree before I did the thing I'd come to do. I opened the lid. The paper had gone soft from being folded so long. My mother's voice came up off the page like she was sitting beside me on the bench. Des, she wrote, by the time you read this I'll be gone, so I'll say it plain the way you like things said. I know about the orchard. I've known longer than your father thinks. I've watched him hide the notices and I've watched him lean on Cole, and I know exactly how this ends if somebody doesn't catch it. She wrote about marrying into this land at 20 and learning to love it the way you love a difficult man, for what it demands of you. And she wrote the part I'd carried for 2 years. Your father's going to lose this place and his pride won't let him take help from the one child strong enough to give him. That's you, Des. It was always you. You're the one who can carry a thing in the dark and never once need a soul to clap for. So I'm asking you to do something hard. Save it if you can. Do it quietly. Let him keep his pride, even when he hasn't earned it, because the land isn't for him, it's for the ones who come after, and somebody has to be the root nobody ever sees. And then she wrote the line. He'll never thank you, do it anyway. You've always been the strong one, Des. That's why it has to be you. I sat under her tree and read it twice, and the second time my eyes stayed dry, which would have surprised her because she always said I cried at the wrong things and never the right ones. I folded the letter back into the tin. He'll never thank you, do it anyway. 2 years I'd done it anyway. And across the yard, the man I'd done it for was about to stand up and call me a disappointment. I put the tin away and sat a while longer with my hands in my lap. From the bench I watched my father work the crowd, and I tried to feel the warmth my mother must have wanted me to feel. I couldn't quite manage it. What I felt was something drier. There's a particular bitterness in keeping a man comfortable on a foundation he doesn't know you poured. He laughed at somebody's joke. He refilled his own cup and looked, for all the world, like the happiest man at the party. And he was. He simply had no idea he was the happiest man at a party in a house his own daughter had been quietly holding over his head for 2 years. The lien in her name, him never once the wiser. I almost laughed, not a kind laugh, the kind you let out before it turns into something worse. My mother had asked me to be the root nobody sees, and I had been, and I would have gone on being it, probably for as long as he lived. That was the plan. Catch the orchard, hold it in the dark, hand it down when the time came, and never once say a word. I had made my peace with being the disappointment if it meant the land stayed Voss land. I could be the silent root. I could carry it forever gladly for my mother. What I would not do, what I could not do, was stand by and watch someone take the very thing I'd bled to protect and try to sell it out from under all of us. And that, though I didn't know it yet, sitting under that tree, was exactly what my brother was doing. I came back toward the party for a piece of pie, and that's when I saw it. Cole had drawn our father away from the crowd, around the side of the house near the propane tank where people go to talk without being overheard. I stopped at the corner with a paper plate in my hand, an ordinary woman getting dessert, invisible the way I'd been invisible all day. Cole had a folder. He opened it against the side of the house and held out a pen. "Just here, Dad," he said, "and here where the tabs are, just so it's all squared away and nobody can give us grief about it later." My father patted his shirt pocket for his reading glasses and didn't find them. He squinted at the page. "It's a lot of paper, son." Cole smiled, smooth as syrup. "It's nothing, lawyer stuff, protects the place. You trust me, don't you?" And there it was again, the question my brother had been asking our father his whole life, the one that wasn't really a question at all. My father took the pen, but before he signed, the breeze caught the folder's cover and lifted it, and I saw the logo printed on the corner of the top page. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't Marion's firm. It was a name I recognized from my own work, a real estate development outfit 2 counties over that handled exactly one kind of transaction and one kind only. They don't protect places, they subdivide and move them. My father set the pen to the paper and I heard myself say from across the yard louder than I meant to, "Dad, wait." My father looked up, annoyed at the interruption, and Cole closed the folder fast, the way you shut a door on a room you don't want seen. "It's family business, Odessa," Cole said. "Nothing that concerns you." The old line, the one that had kept me out of every important room since I was 19. My father's jaw set. "We'll finish this inside, son," he said, and tucked the folder under his arm and steered Cole back toward the crowd, and the moment was gone. I stood there with my pie going warm and useless in my hand, but moments like that leave a trail. A few minutes later I was at the drink table and Brian was beside Aunt Opal, the two of them with their heads together, not as quiet as they thought. Brian was glowing. She didn't know I was close enough to hear. "Once it's all signed over," she said, "Cole says we'll finally get what we're owed after everything we've put up with." Aunt Opal patted her hand and said it was about time somebody around here was sensible. Signed over, not inherited, not someday. Signed over now with the development company's logo on the paperwork and a husband in a hurry. I'd spent the whole afternoon collecting pieces, and right there at the drink table they snapped together into a shape I recognized cold. My brother wasn't securing the orchard for the next generation. He was getting our father to sign the property into his control so he could sell it, get what we're owed. I set down the pie. I needed to see those papers, and I needed to see them before my father's pen ever touched that page for real. I waited for my chance. It came when the cake was cut and the whole crowd drifted toward the long table, even Cole, even my father. I told a cousin I needed the bathroom and slipped in through the kitchen door into the cool dim of the house I grew up in. The folder was sitting on the kitchen table where my father had set it down next to his glasses and his truck keys. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sorry either. I opened it. The top page was exactly what I'd feared and worse. The listing agreement, drawn up and ready, naming the orchard, the 60 acres, the barn, all of it. The asking price was printed in bold near the top, and it was low, the kind of low you set when you want a fast sale and don't much care what the land is actually worth. But that wasn't the part that stopped my breath. The seller's signature line at the bottom didn't say Gideon Voss. It said Cole Voss by power of attorney. I stood in my mother's kitchen and understood the whole machine at last. Cole had already gotten our father to sign a limited power of attorney, probably months earlier, dressed up as lawyer stuff, protects the place. Now he was using it to list the orchard for sale under his own hand. The signatures he needed today weren't to protect anything. They were the last few that would let him close. My father thought he was securing a legacy. He was signing away the right to ever stop his son from selling his home out from under him. I slid out my phone and photographed every page, the listing, the low price, Cole's signature on the seller's line. Then I closed the folder exactly as I'd found it. My hands were steady. They're always steady. That's the one thing about me nobody ever gave me credit for. Here's the thing about being underestimated for years. People forget to hide things from you. They assume you're not paying attention, that you don't matter enough to notice. By the time my brother slid that paperwork across the table, I'd already spent 2 years learning exactly what our family was worth, and exactly who was quietly trying to sell it. I didn't confront anyone at the party. That's the mistake the disappointment is supposed to make, the scene, the tears, the accusation nobody believes. I'm not built that way. I went back out, ate a polite slice of cake, said my goodbyes were coming soon, and then stepped around the barn where I had a bar of sign. Alan called Marion Petrakis at home on a holiday. She answered with cake in her own mouth, somebody's cookout going on her end too. I told her what I'd seen, the folder, the development company, the listing agreement signed by Cole under power of attorney. Marion stopped chewing. She asked me 3 sharp questions: the date on the agreement, the name of the brokerage, whether the price was listed. I answered all 3. There was a long quiet on the line. Then Marion said the thing I already knew but needed to hear from someone with a license. Odessa, if he's got a valid power of attorney and he lists it and finds a buyer, your father could lose that orchard in 60 days, and there's not a lot Gideon could do about it once it's in motion. Especially, she added, if Gideon doesn't fully understand what he already signed. I leaned against the barn my grandfather built and looked out at the green rows on the split rail fence and the crab orchard. 60 days, my brother had built a clean, quiet machine to take the orchard, and it was already running. He'd thought of everything except one thing. He didn't know the property could never actually be sold without first going through me. I want to slow down here because this is the hinge the whole afternoon turned on. My brother had spent months working our father, gathering signatures, lining up a buyer, building a power of attorney into a key that would let him sell the family orchard and pocket what he called what we're owed. It was, I'll admit, a good plan, patient, cruel, exactly the kind of thing he'd always been better at than honest work. But every plan rests on an assumption, and Cole's plan rested on one that had been false for 2 years. He believed the orchard could be sold free and clear. It couldn't. When I bought that charged-off note and folded it into the trust, the bank's claim on the property became mine. The recorded deed of trust, the lien securing the full value of the place, now named my trust, the one I funded, the one I controlled. My father still held title, still owned the land on paper, but that land carried a lien for everything it was worth, and the lien holder was me. My father lived there untouched by my arrangement, never knowing the difference because nothing in his daily life had changed. So picture it, my brother standing in the side yard getting our father to sign a power of attorney to sell a house that was already quietly, legally, beyond his power to sell out from under us. A power of attorney lets you act for the person who granted it. It does not let you hand a buyer clean title when a lien for the property's full value is sitting in someone else's hands entirely. Cole had built a beautiful key and fitted it carefully into a lock that opened nothing. He could list the orchard. He could shake hands with a buyer. And the second anyone ran a title search, the whole thing would collapse because the claim on that title wasn't the bank's anymore and it wasn't Gideon's to clear. It belonged to a trust, and the trustee was the disappointment. So I had a choice. Standing behind that barn with my phone still warm in my hand, I could do nothing loud at all. I could let Cole run his scheme straight into a title search and watch it die on its own quietly the way I did everything. The buyer would walk. Cole would have to explain to a development company why he'd tried to sell a property he didn't fully control. My father would never even know how close he'd come. And I could go on being the silent root my mother had asked me to be, holding the land in the dark for the next generation, letting them call me whatever kept the peace. That was the safe path. It was the path I'd walked for 2 years and I was good at. But I sat down on an overturned bucket in the barn shade and thought about my mother's letter. "He'll never thank you, do it anyway." She'd asked me to protect the land. She had not asked me to protect the land. There's a difference, and it took me 2 years and 1 4th of July to feel it in my chest. Protecting the land quietly had cost me nothing but money and pride. But protecting the lie year after year had cost me my name and my own family. It had let a good son keep looking good in everyone's eyes while he tried to rob the lot of them blind. And it had let my father believe every single day that the daughter who'd saved him was the one who'd failed him. My mother asked me to keep his pride even when he hadn't earned it. But a man who'd sell the legacy he's bragging about doesn't deserve the truth kept from the people he's bragging to. I made my decision, not revenge, daylight. I came back around the barn meaning to find a quiet way to warn my father one more time, the way I'd warned him about the second notice 2 years earlier. I owed him that much, I thought. I caught him near the dessert table away from Cole for once and kept my voice low and even. "Dad," I said, "before you sign anything. Else today will you let me read it? Just read it, 5 minutes." For a second something flickered across his face and I let myself hope. Then Cole appeared at his elbow like he'd been summoned and my father's jaw hardened and whatever door had cracked open swung shut again. He looked at me in front of Hank Renfrew, in front of the cousins, in front of his own sister, and he said it loud enough for all of them. "You lost the right to worry about this family the day you let your mother die." The words landed like a slap. Hank looked away at his shoes. Brian lifted her cup to hide a smile and didn't quite manage it, and I stood there in the late gold light with 4 years of being the disappointment pressing down on my shoulders, and I understood there was no quiet way left. I had offered him the truth gently and he had spat it back in front of witnesses. He wanted me cast out. He wanted it public. Fine, I have spent my whole life being told I was cold. So I let myself be exactly as cold as the moment called for, which is to say perfectly, professionally clear. If he wanted the truth public, he was going to get it public. I simply wasn't going to raise my voice to do it. I left the party early before the toasts and nobody noticed me go, which was fitting. I drove the 45 minutes back to Milford Junction with the windows down and my mother's letter on the seat beside me, and by the time I reached my office the sun was low and my mind was clear as a closed file. I let myself in and turned on one lamp, then I printed 3 documents. The first was the recorded deed of trust, the public record showing the orchard held in my trust, dated 2 years back, stamped by the county. The second was the bank's payoff letter, proof that the debt that nearly took the orchard had been satisfied in full by me, the very spring my father told the neighbors he'd handled it himself. The third was a copy of the listing agreement, the one I'd photographed in my mother's kitchen, Cole's signature at the bottom under power of attorney, the asking price printed low and ugly across the top. 3 pieces of paper, the whole truth of 4 years in black and white, the only language this family had never once let me speak. I didn't add a single word of accusation. I didn't write a letter calling him cruel or calling my brother a thief. The papers said all of it without ever raising their voice, which is the only way I've ever known how to win. I squared the edges, slid them into a plain manila envelope, the kind I use for clients, and wrote one line on the front, small in my steady underwriter's hand, "Happy 4th of July." Then I turned off the lamp and went home because the day wasn't over yet, and there was one more place that envelope needed to be. I almost didn't go back. I sat at my own kitchen table that evening with the envelope in front of me and let myself feel the size of what it would do. Once those papers were out, there was no folding them back up. My father would learn in front of everyone that the disappointment had held his house in her hands for 2 years. Cole would be finished in the family, probably out of it entirely. The clean story they'd all told themselves would shatter right there on the patio stones, and they would never be able to glue it back the way it had been. Part of me wanted to protect them from that even then. That's the part my mother knew about, the root that grows in the dark and asks for nothing. But I read her letter one more time and let the last line settle where it belonged. "He'll never thank you. Do it anyway." She'd written that about saving the land. I understood now that doing it anyway meant the hard whole of it, not just the easy quiet part. It meant letting the truth sit down at the table, even when the truth would cost me the last thread of belonging I had left. I wasn't going back to humiliate my father. He'd handled his own humiliation just fine without my help. I was going back because a lie had worn my name for 4 years, and I was finally done lending it out. I checked the time. The party would be winding down, the family, the neighbors lingering at the fence, the perfect audience for the only kind of reckoning I've ever believed in, the kind where you simply stop letting people lie about you and let the paperwork do the rest. I picked up the envelope and my keys. It was nearly dusk when I came back up the gravel drive. The cars had thinned, but the core of it was still there, the family at the long table, the Renfrews leaning on the fence with coffee, the citronella candles just lit against the bars. The light had gone that deep summer gold that makes everything look like a memory while it's still happening. I parked at the far end of the lane, the way I always did, and walked up through the mowed grass with the envelope in my hand. Conversations dipped as I passed, the way they do when the person people have been discussing finally arrives. Cole saw me first, and something tightened in his face, a flash of the boy who used to check whether I'd seen him take the last of something. He didn't know what I knew, but men like my brother always feel the weather change before they understand why. At the head of the table, my father was holding quart glass in hand, telling the Renfrews a story about my grandfather. Cole, recovering, lifted his own cup and called out, warm and false, "Hey, before everybody heads out, somebody ought to say something for Dad." Murmur of agreement, cups raised. My father waved it off the way men do when they want exactly to be pushed. And then he got slowly to his feet, tall and gray in the candlelight, the patriarch, the happiest man at a party in a house he didn't fully own. I stopped a few feet from the table. I held the envelope down at my side where no one had reason to look at it yet, and waited for my father to say what I already knew in my bones he was about to say. My father lifted his glass and looked around the table at all of it, the family, the land, the gold-lit evening, his whole kingdom. "I've been blessed," he said, and his voice carried the way it always did with an audience. 3 generations on this ground. He started naming his blessings around the table, nodding at Cole first and longest, my son who stayed, who works this land beside me. Brian got a nod. The cousins, even Aunt Opal, who pressed a hand to her chest. He said he was grateful for all his children. And then his eyes found me standing just off the end of the table in the candlelight, and the warmth drained out of his face like water out of a cracked trough. The whole table followed his gaze to me. "Grateful for all my children," he said again, slower now, making sure the neighbors heard it too, well, most of them. The words went out across the patio and hung there in the bug light. Somebody's fork stopped scraping. Hank looked away. Brian lifted her cup to hide a smile and didn't quite manage it. Aunt Opal gave one small satisfied nod, a judge agreeing with her own verdict. And Cole, my brother, the thief in a press shirt, looked at me with something close to pity because he thought he'd already won, and this was just the part where they put the disappointment in her place one more time before the night ended. Nobody defended me, not one of them. In 4 years, not one of them ever had. I stood very still and let the silence finish. Then I did the only thing left that was mine to do. There were no tears for me. I want you to know that because everyone at that table was braced for me. They wanted the disappointment to crumble, to make a scene, to prove the story true. I have never once in my life given people the version of me they were rooting for. So I smiled, a real one, almost gentle, which I think unsettled my father more than shouting ever could have. I stepped up to the head of the table into the candlelight, close enough that he had to look at me, and I set the manila envelope down beside his plate, square and quiet, the way you set down a thing that's already decided. His eyes dropped to the line on the front, "Happy 4th of July." Then they came back up to mine, narrow, suspicious, a man who could feel the ground shifting and didn't yet know which direction it was going to move. "What's this?" he said, not really a question, a warning. I kept my voice low, and even the voice I use when a client is about to learn something hard and true. "Happy 4th, Dad," I said. "Open it when you're ready." That was all. No accusation, no speech, 4 years of it, and I spent fewer words on him than he just spent on me. I looked around the table once at Cole, at Brian, at Opal, at the Renfrews frozen at the fence, and let them all see that I was perfectly, completely calm. Then I turned and walked back down through the grass toward my car. Behind me, I heard my father pick up the envelope. I heard the paper. I didn't turn around. Some things you don't need to watch to know they've landed. The walk to my car felt a mile long. Behind me, the patio had gone quiet in that particular way a crowd goes quiet when it can't decide yet whether to be embarrassed or afraid. I heard Cole's voice, pitched easy and loud for the neighbors' benefit, telling everyone not to mind me. "She's just being dramatic," he said. "You know how she gets." "Ignore it, Dad, throw it out." But my father didn't throw it out. I could feel that without looking, the way you feel a storm cell change direction. There's a kind of silence a man makes when he's reading something that doesn't match the story in his head, and it was pouring off that patio now, thick as the citronella smoke. "Open it," somebody murmured, maybe Brian, curious enough to spite herself, maybe Opal. I reached my car, put my hand on the door handle, and made myself stop for just a second in the last of the light. I thought about my mother under her tree and the night she died and the years of invoices knob. "Audie ever saw, this is for you," I thought, and I wasn't entirely sure if I meant her or the girl I used to be, the one who brought a folder to a deathbed and got told the family needed faith instead. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of an envelope being torn the rest of the way open, then the rustle and slide of papers coming out into the candlelight. I heard my father draw breath, and then, across the whole gold evening, I heard that breath catch in his throat as his eyes found the first line of the first page. I opened my car door. The shouting was about to start. My father read the first page, then the second, then the third, and the whole party watched the color leave his face one shade at a time. The first page was the recorded deed of trust, filed with the county 2 years back, the lien on the orchard and all 60 acres assigned to my trust, my name as trustee. The second was the bank's payoff letter, proof that the debt that should have taken the orchard had been satisfied in full, paid by me. The very spring he'd told these same neighbors he'd handled it himself. And the third was the listing agreement, his son's signature at the bottom under power of attorney, the asking price printed low and ugly across the top, the machine that had been quietly working to sell the family's home right out from under the very man making the toast. He understood it all in one terrible rush. The disappointment had saved the orchard. The son he'd just praised had been trying to sell it. The legacy he'd promised the neighbors hadn't been free and clear for 2 years, and the only thing standing between it and the auctioneer had been her. My father came up out of his chair so fast it went over backward into the grass. "Cole," he said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle. "What is this? What did you do?" Cole was already on his feet, hands up, the easy charm gone gray. "Dad, that's not, she's twisting it, that's," but my father wasn't listening anymore. He was turning the pages over in his shaking hands and roaring now, no words even, just a sound, the sound of a proud man watching every story he'd told about himself come apart at once. The Renfrews came off the fence. Down the road, a porch light snapped on, and then another, neighbors stepping out to see what was tearing the evening open. I was in my car with the window down when my father finally found words again and shouted my name across the yard. Not the disappointment, my name, Odessa. I started the engine and said the only thing I had left to say, quiet, through the open window into the chaos of the people who'd never once defended me. "I didn't come to take anything, Dad. I came to give it back. It was always going to be yours. I just made sure no one could take it from you, including him. I didn't stay to watch it burn. That's the difference between me and the people at that table, the one thing I held on to driving home in the dark. They needed an audience for everything, their pride, their grief, their cruelty. I didn't need one for my own justice, but I saw enough in the rearview to last me." Cole was backing away from the table with his hands still up, talking fast, and no one was looking at him the way they used to. Brian had stepped clear of her husband, an actual foot of evening air between them now, the first crack in a marriage built on what they thought they would earn. Yet Opal sat with her mouth open, and for once in 72 years nothing to say. And my father, my proud, hard, foolish father, had sat back down in a chair somebody righted for him, the papers loose in his lap, staring at the recorded deed with my name on it like it was written in a language he was only now learning to read. The neighbors stood at their fences in the porch light. Everyone who'd heard him call me a disappointment was now hearing the rest of it, and there's no folder face down on a dresser big enough to hide this. I turned out of the lane onto the county road and rolled the window up. The shouting faded behind me. I drove the 45 minutes home with the radio off and my mother's letter on the seat beside me, and somewhere around the county line I realized my hands were finally, after 4 years, not steady at all. They were shaking. I let them. I'd earned the right to shake. The listing came down within the week. A title search would have killed it anyway, but Marion made one call to the brokerage and it vanished by Tuesday like it had never existed. Cole had a harder week. The creditors he'd been planning to pay with the sale didn't disappear just because his scheme did, and without the orchard to sell, he had nothing to wave at them. Brian took the kids to her mother's place 2 counties over, and last I heard, hadn't come back. The golden third-generation son turned out to be just a man who owed money and lied about it, and a small town does not forget that quickly. Marion and I finished the work I'd started 2 years earlier. This time my father signed willingly, eyes open, and we folded the orchard into a proper family trust, the kind built to outlive all of us. My father gets to live there the rest of his days exactly as he always has, every row and every board of it. But it can never be sold out from under the family again, not by Cole, not by anyone, because the terms don't allow it and the trustee won't sign it. The trustee is still me. My father called 9 days after the 4th. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he didn't apologize, not really. My father doesn't have the equipment for it, but he said my name, Odessa, and not the other word, and he asked, in a voice I'd never heard him use, why I never told him. I said, you wouldn't have let me help if you'd known it was me. And he was quiet a long time because we both knew it was true. Then he asked if I'd come out to the orchard again sometime. And here is where I drew the line my mother never got to draw for herself. I'll keep the roof over your head, Dad, I said, for her and for the land and for the people who come after, but I won't keep standing in a room that calls me the disappointment. Those are 2 different things now, and you don't get one without the other anymore. He didn't argue. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't argue. I've thought a lot since that night about what my mother asked me, and about the part of her letter I only understood too late. Being the strong one doesn't mean you owe people your silence forever. And sometimes the kindest thing and the strongest thing turn out to be the very same thing, which is to finally let the truth sit down at the table and stay. That's where I'll leave it tonight. 1 envelope, 1 quiet drive home, 1 family that finally knows who was holding the roof up all along. The watermelon juice still damp on the plates. The second notice hidden under the Sunday paper. Do it anyway, in my mother's shaking hand. If you've ever been called the cold one by people who never once saw what you carried in the dark, tell me about it in the comments, because I read every one and you are not the cold one in your story. Subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in the next one.